My Sheating wife brought her boyfriend into our home while the children were there. I caught them having and she regretted it very much. But then I had been feeling unwell for a while, and then one Monday at work, I went to the bathroom. The pain that hit me was so intense it made me shout. It felt like someone had shoved a red-hot iron rod right inside me. I left work immediately, drove straight to see Dr. Mitchell, our family doctor for years. After a thorough checkup and some tests, he called me into his office. "I have to ask you some very personal questions, Brian. These aren't easy, but the law requires it." For a moment, I was confused. What could the law possibly have to do with the kind of pain I was feeling? "Well, I'm not sure how to tell you this, Brian, but you have an STD. It's treatable and will go away, but it is an STD nonetheless." His words hit me like a ton of bricks. I tried to grasp what he was saying, but the word STD just kept bouncing around in my mind. How was that even possible? I had never cheated on my wife. Not once. Never even thought about it. Yet there I was, being told I had an STD. "Brian, are you okay?" "Am I okay? Hell no, I'm not okay, Doc. How could I have gotten an STD? I've never cheated on my wife. How could this happen?" "Well, Brian, some of the questions I'm going to ask are about that. Who have been your sexual partners recently?" "My wife, document. She's the only one." My stomach twisted in knots, and before I knew it, I was throwing up into the trash can Dr. Mitchell quickly shoved in front of me. It took a while for me to regain my composure, but as the shock wore off, the realization hit me. My wife had to be the one who gave it to me. The horror of that truth felt like a knife to my heart. Dr. Mitchell had been our family doctor for years. He had even delivered our 3 children. His face was filled with sorrow as he looked at me. "I'm sorry, Brian. I know this is difficult to hear. I figured with all your traveling for work, there might have been—" "I'm sorry. So, what do I do now, Doc? My wife has obviously been cheating on me. What's the next step?" "You need to find out who her partners have been. You also have to be completely honest with me, Brian. If there's anyone else you've been with, now is the time to tell me." "I told you, Doc. There's no one else. I've never been with anyone but my wife." "Then we have to assume that your wife gave it to you. You'll need to tell her, and have her come in for treatment. Hopefully, it hasn't progressed to a point where it's no longer treatable for her. She'll have to tell us who she's been with. If it's been more than one person, we'll need to know who they are." "Why would you need to know that?" "Because we'll have to contact everyone she's been with sexually to let them know. They have a right to know, and the CDC will require it. They'll be notified, and an investigator might get involved as well." I sat there in disbelief, the full weight of it crashing down on me. My straight-laced, proper wife had cheated on me and given me an STD. My mind raced, trying to process everything. What was going to happen when I went home? What would she say? How could she have done this to me? We had been married for 12 years, and our kids were just getting to an age where I thought we could start spending more time together. Obviously, she had other plans. I left Dr. Mitchell's office after he finished talking to me. He was worried I might do something drastic, but I was too numb to react in any way. I went home early, for the first time in weeks. When I got there, her car was gone, and the house was empty. The kids were still at school, and they wouldn't be home for another couple of hours. I sat in the living room, staring blankly at nothing. I wanted to drink more than anything, but the antibiotics I was on wouldn't allow it. I felt paralyzed, going over the last few years of our marriage, trying to figure out when and why she had decided to betray me. Had I not been enough for her? My mind was in turmoil. I heard the front door open, and then her laugh filled the house, until she saw me sitting there. She stopped in her tracks. A man stood behind her, looking like a deer caught in headlights. "Brian, what are you doing home in the middle of the day?" she asked nervously. "Tell your lover there that he gave you an STD," I said, my voice shaking with barely contained anger. Her face went pale. "What are you talking about?" she stammered. "You," I hissed through clenched teeth. "You gave me an STD. I had to go to the doctor today because I was in so much pain, and that piece of trash behind you gave it to you. You both need to see a doctor right now." She started crying immediately, realizing she had been caught. Her lover, realizing the situation, quickly retreated out the door. I was shaking with rage, my heart breaking with every second that passed. Brian, you gave me an STD. I shouted, cutting her off. I've never cheated on you. I've never even thought about it, but you? I was losing control and I knew it. Get out. Both of you. Go see a doctor and get treated. She stood there sobbing, knowing there was no way to explain this away. Her lover had already fled, and now I was the one about to fall apart. I collapsed back into my chair as she left the house, the sound of her car starting and driving away echoing in my ears. My life had crumbled in a matter of hours. That night, the kids came home, and I could hardly look at them. I was half drunk, sitting on our bed in a suit, staring at the wall. Ava, my eldest, was the first to notice something was wrong. Dad, why are you home so early? And why have you been drinking? Ava asked, her voice filled with concern. Ethan, my middle child, chimed in, Dad, are you okay? Even little Mia, my youngest, was confused. Don't throw up, Dad. Do you need a bowl or something? I looked at them, my heart breaking. Look, kids, I caught something. Your mother might have passed it to me. She's at the doctor now, and she'll be home soon. Just go to your homework. Everything will work out. They slowly left the room, clearly uneasy. I must have looked like a mess to them, drunk, in a suit, rambling about their mother. They had never seen me like this before. I loved my kids more than anything in the world, and I was ashamed that they had to see me like that. I noticed then that Ava hadn't left. She had sat down on the bed, tears welling in her eyes. Ava, what's wrong? I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. She wiped her eyes. Dad, I should have told you. I saw Mom with someone. Last month. I should have told you then. I was stunned. What are you talking about, Ava? She took a deep breath and continued. One day, school was canceled because of the snowstorm. I came home early, and I heard noises coming from the guest bedroom. I thought maybe you were home, but when I peeked in, Mom was there, with another man. She broke down completely, sobbing into my chest. I held her close, stroking her hair, trying to comfort her while my own heart shattered. She had caught her mother cheating, and I hadn't even known. At least now I understood. Sophia had been unfaithful for a long time. Ava eventually got up and went to wash her face, leaving me alone with my thoughts. What was I supposed to do now? My wife of 12 years had betrayed me in the worst possible way. Divorce seemed inevitable, but what would happen to the kids? How could I possibly explain this to them? Later that night, I heard Sophia come home. She entered the house quietly, her face red and puffy from crying. Brian, she said softly, sitting down across from me at the kitchen table. I'm so sorry. I never meant for this to happen. I don't want to hear your excuses, I interrupted. You gave me an STD. You betrayed me. She started crying again, but I couldn't bear to look at her. Go sleep in the guest room, I said, my voice cold and distant. We'll figure out the rest tomorrow. I left the kitchen, retreating to my den. As soon as the door closed behind me, I broke down. I hadn't cried in years, but that night, I cried like a baby. My wife, my partner, my best friend, had torn my life apart. I had no idea what to do next, but I knew that nothing would ever be the same. The next morning, I went to work before anyone else arrived. In the quiet of the office, I made the decision that would change everything. I was going to file for divorce. When I got home, Sophia was sitting alone in the living room, her eyes red from crying. She looked up at me, but I could tell she already knew what I was going to say. Sophia, I began, we're done? Certainly. Here's the second part of the revised text, continuing from where the first part left off, reworked according to your instructions. This will cover about 10,000 characters. I had left Sophia sitting in the living room, feeling like my entire world had collapsed. The next few days were a blur. I filed for divorce. It was the hardest thing I had ever done, but there was no way around it. I couldn't look at her without feeling a surge of anger, betrayal, and disgust. We had been together for so long, almost 12 years, but the woman I had loved had been lying to me, cheating behind my back, and now this. I couldn't bear the thought of living under the same roof with her any longer. For the next few weeks, Sophia slept in the guest room while the divorce papers were being prepared. The kids were confused but didn't know the whole story yet. They sensed the tension and asked questions, but I didn't have the strength to tell them. I wasn't even sure how to explain what had happened. It was about 2 weeks after I had filed the papers that things really fell apart. One night, I got home from work, and Ava was sitting on the front porch, looking shaken. Beside her were Ethan and little Mia, who were holding each other tightly. As soon as I saw them, I knew something terrible had happened. "Ava, what's going on?" I asked, my heart pounding. She looked at me with tears in her eyes. Mom brought a man home," she said quietly. My blood ran cold. "What?" "She brought him home, Dad. They're in the guest room now. We heard them." She trailed off, unable to finish the sentence. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I felt sick to my stomach. Sophia had actually brought a man into our home, knowing the kids were there. I marched inside, my heart racing with anger. I could hear them, Sophia and this guy, through the door of the guest room. The sound made my skin crawl. Without thinking, I kicked the door open. The guy jumped up, startled, his eyes wide with shock. Sophia sat there, frozen in fear, as she realized what I had just walked in on. "Get out," I said through clenched teeth, my voice low and dangerous. The man was too stunned to move. I said, "Get the hell out of my house," I shouted. He scrambled to get dressed, fumbling with his clothes in his panic. I grabbed him by the collar and shoved him out the door. He didn't even try to argue. Sophia was still sitting on the bed, her face pale, tears welling up in her eyes. "Brian, just don't," I said, shaking my head. "Pack your things. I want you out of this house. I've had enough." Tears streamed down her face as she realized there was no saving this. She had crossed every line imaginable. There was no coming back from this. I left the room and went back outside to the porch, where the kids were still waiting. Ava looked up at me, her face full of worry. "Are you okay, Dad?" she asked softly. I couldn't even bring myself to answer. My mind was spinning. I felt like I was drowning in a sea of betrayal. How could Sophia have done this to me? To our family? Later that night, after she had packed some bags and left the house, I sat down with the kids. I knew I had to tell them something. They deserved to know what was going on. "Listen, kids," I started, my voice shaky. "Your mom and I, things aren't good between us right now. She's made some choices that have hurt me and hurt our family. I'm sorry you had to see what you saw today." Mia looked up at me, her big eyes filled with confusion. "Is Mom coming back?" I hesitated. "No, sweetheart. She's not coming back. At least not to live here. Your mom and I, we're getting a divorce." The words felt heavy, like a final nail in the coffin of my marriage. Ava started crying softly, and Ethan stared at the floor, his face unreadable. Mia, being the youngest, didn't fully understand what was happening, but I could see the sadness in her eyes. It broke my heart. "Dad," Ava said after a long silence, "I knew something was wrong. I should have told you when I saw her, with that guy a few weeks ago. I'm so sorry." I pulled her into a hug. "It's not your fault, Ava. None of this is your fault." We sat there for a long time, the four of us, trying to process what had happened. I felt like I had failed them. I had tried to be a good father, a good husband, but somewhere along the way, everything had gone horribly wrong. The next morning, I woke up feeling like I hadn't slept at all. I had tossed and turned all night, replaying everything in my mind. Sophia was gone, but the pain of her betrayal was still fresh. I had to figure out how to move forward, not just for myself, but for the kids. That afternoon, I called my lawyer and told him to speed up the divorce proceedings. I wanted this over as quickly as possible. I couldn't stand the idea of being tied to Sophia any longer than I had to. A few days later, I was at home when the doorbell rang. I opened it to find Sophia standing there, looking like a shell of the woman I once knew. Her face was pale, and her eyes were bloodshot from crying. "Brian, can we talk?" she asked softly. I didn't want to talk. I didn't want to hear her excuses or her apologies, but I stepped aside and let her in anyway. We sat down at the kitchen table, the silence between us thick with tension. "I know I've messed up," she began, her voice barely above a whisper. "I've made terrible mistakes, and I've hurt you in ways I can never make up for. I'm so sorry, Brian. I don't know what came over me. I was lonely. You were always traveling, and I felt invisible. I stared at her, my anger simmering just below the surface. So, what? You decided to screw around behind my back? That's how you dealt with feeling invisible. She flinched at my words, tears streaming down her face. It wasn't like that. I never wanted to hurt you. I don't know how it happened. I shook my head, unable to believe what I was hearing. You don't know how it happened? You cheated on me, Sophia. You brought a man into our home, with our kids here. How could you do that? She sobbed harder, her shoulders shaking with the weight of her guilt. I don't expect you to forgive me. I don't deserve it. But please, Brian, don't shut me out of the kids' lives. They need their mother. They need a mother who respects their father and their home, I said coldly. But that's not who you are anymore, is it? She didn't answer. She just cried, her tears falling onto the table between us. I felt a mix of emotions, anger, sadness, disappointment, and somewhere deep down, a sliver of pity for her. She had destroyed our marriage, but in doing so, she had also destroyed herself. I'll never forgive you for what you did, I said finally, but I won't keep you from the kids. They deserve to have both parents in their lives, even if one of them is a liar and a cheat. She looked up at me, her eyes filled with gratitude. Thank you, Brian. I know I don't deserve your kindness, but thank you. I stood up, unable to bear the sight of her any longer. Just go, Sophia. Go before I change my mind. She left without another word, and I was alone again, the weight of everything pressing down on me. Over the next few weeks, the divorce moved forward quickly. There wasn't much to fight over. She didn't want the house, and I didn't care about the savings or the retirement. We agreed on joint custody of the kids, though I knew they would be spending most of their time with me. The day the divorce was finalized, I felt a strange mix of relief and sadness. It was over. 12 years of marriage gone, but at least I could start to heal now. For the next several months, I focused on the kids. I wanted to make sure they were okay, that they knew I was there for them. Ava had a harder time than the others. She had been the one to see Sophia with another man, and that had left a deep scar. I got her into therapy, hoping it would help her process everything. Ethan, on the other hand, was quiet. He didn't talk much about the divorce, but I could tell it was weighing on him. He had always been close to his mom, and I knew he felt betrayed in his own way. Mia, being the youngest, was the most resilient. She didn't fully understand what had happened, but she knew things weren't the same anymore. I did my best to keep her life as normal as possible, but I knew it wasn't easy for her. As time went on, we started to adjust to our new normal. The kids were doing better, and I was slowly beginning to heal. I even started thinking about dating again, though the thought of it terrified me. I hadn't been on a date in over a decade, and I wasn't sure I even knew how to do it anymore. Here's the third part of the revised text, continuing the story with attention to detail and keeping it within about 10,000 characters. As the months passed, the kids and I slowly found our rhythm again. Ava had been making progress in therapy, and even though she still held a lot of resentment toward her mother, I could see she was beginning to heal. Ethan was spending more time with friends, staying busy, and it seemed like he was working through things in his own way. Mia was still too young to fully grasp what had happened, but she was adjusting well. The house felt emptier without Sophia, but at the same time, it was more peaceful. One evening, as I sat in the living room, Ava came to me with a serious look on her face. "Dad, I've been thinking," she started. "About what, honey?" I asked, a little concerned by her tone. "I know this is going to sound weird, but I think you should start dating again." She looked at me carefully, as if waiting for my reaction. I blinked at her in surprise. "Dating? I don't know if I'm ready for that, Ava." She shook her head, smiling softly. "You've been through so much, Dad. You deserve to be happy again. I don't want you to be alone for the rest of your life just because Mom messed up." The thought of dating felt daunting, especially after everything that had happened with Sophia. The idea of trusting someone again seemed almost impossible. But Ava had a point. I couldn't just let the betrayal define the rest of my life. "I don't even know where to begin," I admitted. "It's been so long. I wouldn't know how to act, what to say. I'm not even sure I'd know how to ask someone out anymore." Ava's smile grew. "That's where I come in. I raised an eyebrow. What do you mean? I've already thought of someone. Her name is Hannah. She's smart, funny, and successful. She's a family friend, actually, though you might not remember her. I've been talking to her a lot lately, and I think you two would get along really well. Ava, I don't think setting me up on a blind date is the best idea. She shook her head, looking determined. Trust me, Dad. Just one date. If it's terrible, I'll never bring it up again. But if it's not, who knows? I sighed, leaning back in my chair. Okay, one date. But don't get your hopes up. I'm doing this for you. Ava grinned, excited. I'll set it up. You won't regret it, I promise. 2 days later, Ava came home from school with the news that the date had been arranged. You're meeting Hannah this Saturday at 7 p.m., Dad. She's really excited to meet you. The rest of the week felt strange. I couldn't believe I had agreed to this. The idea of sitting across from someone new, trying to make conversation, was nerve-wracking. What if I said something wrong? What if I wasn't ready? What if it just felt too soon? Saturday came faster than I expected. I got ready with Ava's help, who picked out my clothes like it was a big event. Don't worry, Dad. You look great, she said as I nervously adjusted my shirt in the mirror. When I arrived at the restaurant, I felt my anxiety spike. I hadn't dated since my early 20s, and now I was in my late 30s, feeling like I had no idea what I was doing. I walked in, and there she was, Hannah. She was sitting at a table near the window, looking as nervous as I felt. She stood up as I approached, smiling warmly. You must be Brian. Yeah, and you must be Hannah, I replied, shaking her hand. She had a firm grip, which I appreciated. As we sat down, I could feel the tension easing a little. Hannah was easy to talk to. She wasn't like anyone I had expected. She was down to earth, funny, and seemed genuinely interested in getting to know me. We talked about our jobs, our kids, she had a son and daughter from her own previous marriage, and our shared experiences of going through difficult divorces. Divorce can really mess with your head, she said at one point, sipping her wine. It makes you question everything you thought you knew about love and trust. I nodded, feeling a deep connection in that moment. Yeah, it's like you don't know if you can ever open yourself up again. The fear of being hurt is always there. Hannah smiled gently. I get that. It took me a long time to feel like I could put myself out there again. But here we are, right? Yeah, I said with a small chuckle. Here we are. By the end of the night, I realized I had actually enjoyed myself. I hadn't thought about Sophia or the betrayal once. It was refreshing, almost liberating, to feel like maybe I wasn't completely broken after all. As we said goodbye outside the restaurant, Hannah gave me a quick hug. I had a really great time, Brian. Me too, I replied, feeling a little surprised at myself for saying it. Maybe we can do this again sometime, she asked, her voice hopeful. I hesitated for just a moment before nodding. Yeah, I'd like that. When I got home, Ava was waiting up for me, a mischievous grin on her face. So, how'd it go? I sat down, shaking my head with a smile. You were right. I liked her. Ava pumped her fist in the air. Yes, I knew it. Don't get too excited, I warned. It's just one date. We'll see what happens. Over the next few months, I continued seeing Hannah. She became a bright spot in my life, someone I could talk to, laugh with, and slowly begin to trust. It wasn't long before the kids met her, and to my relief, they liked her. She was great with them, especially Mia, who immediately took a liking to her. Ethan and Ava were a little more reserved at first, but over time, they warmed up to her too. Hannah and I didn't rush things. We took it slow, letting the relationship develop naturally. For the first time in years, I felt like I had found someone who genuinely cared for me, someone who wasn't going to hurt me the way Sophia had. And speaking of Sophia, she was still in the picture, though only when it came to the kids. The divorce had been finalized without much of a fight. She saw the kids a couple of weekends a month, but the relationship between her and Ava was strained, to say the least. Ava still harbored a lot of resentment, and I didn't blame her. Sophia had done irreparable damage to our family. One day, about a year after I had started dating Hannah, Sophia showed up unexpectedly at the house. I hadn't seen her in weeks, and when I opened the door, I was shocked by how different she looked. She was thinner, her face drawn and tired. "Brian, can we talk?" she asked, her voice shaky. I sighed, stepping aside to let her in. "What do you want, Sophia?" She sat down at the kitchen table, nervously wringing her hands. "I've been doing some thinking about everything. About what I did." I crossed my arms, leaning against the counter. And I just wanted to say I'm sorry. I know it's way too late for that, but I need you to know that I regret everything. I ruined our marriage, our family. I don't expect you to forgive me, but I need to say it. I stared at her, feeling an odd mixture of anger and pity. "You're right. It is too late." She flinched, nodding. "I figured you'd say that." I didn't know what she expected from me. Did she think an apology would make everything better? Did she believe that after all this time, I'd suddenly forgive her for destroying our family? "Look, Sophia, I've moved on. The kids are doing okay, and I'm doing okay. I don't hold any ill will toward you anymore, but I also don't care about your regrets. You made your choices, and now you have to live with them." Tears welled up in her eyes. "I know. I'm sorry, Brian. I'll never stop being sorry. That's your burden to bear, not mine," I said, my voice firm. "Now, if that's all you came to say, I think you should go." She stood up slowly, wiping her eyes. "Take care of the kids for me. I know they're in good hands." "I always have," I replied, watching as she walked out the door for what felt like the last time. From that day on, I barely thought about Sophia. My life was with Hannah now, and the kids were my focus. A year after Sophia's visit, I proposed to Hannah. We got married. Ava and Mia were bridesmaids, and Ethan was my best man. It had been a year since the divorce, and things were finally starting to settle. The kids were adjusting, and my relationship with Hannah was steady. Sophia rarely came around, only showing up on the weekends when she had visitation rights with the kids. I didn't think about her much anymore, and when I did, it was just a reminder of how things had fallen apart. I had moved on, and I was focused on rebuilding my life. One evening, after dinner with Hannah and the kids, my phone rang. The number was unfamiliar, but something told me I should answer. "Brian Brooks," I said. "Mr. Brooks, this is Detective Morgan from the County Police Department. We need you to come down to the station." I was confused and asked him why. His tone was firm, and he said it was about Sophia. He mentioned something about an incident involving her and asked me to come as soon as possible. I didn't ask too many questions. My stomach was tight with anxiety. I told Hannah, and she agreed to stay with the kids while I went to the station. The drive over was tense. I had no idea what could have happened, but the fact that it involved Sophia immediately put me on edge. When I arrived, I was met by Detective Morgan in the lobby. He didn't waste any time explaining the situation. "Your ex-wife, Sophia, was involved in an altercation tonight with a man named Jason Morgan. I understand you're familiar with him?" I nodded, remembering Jason as the guy I had caught with her during the whole ordeal that ended our marriage. "There's been a fatality," Morgan continued. "Jason is dead." I didn't know what to say. It felt unreal to hear this news. I hadn't spoken to Sophia in months, and now I was being told that her lover was dead. "What happened?" I asked. "There was a domestic disturbance reported by the neighbors. They heard yelling and what sounded like a fight. When officers arrived at the scene, Jason was found with multiple stab wounds. Sophia was still there, covered in blood and in shock. She was arrested and brought here for questioning." I stood there, trying to process the information. The details didn't fully sink in at first. Sophia had always been a lot of things, but I never thought she would be capable of something like this. I asked if I could see her, and after a moment of hesitation, the detective agreed. He led me to a holding room. Through a small window, I saw her sitting on a bench, looking disheveled and out of sorts. Her hands were cuffed, and her hair was a mess. She didn't look up as I entered the room. "Sophia," I said. She lifted her head slowly, and I could see that she had been crying. Her face was streaked with tears, and her expression was a mix of fear and exhaustion. For a few moments, neither of us said anything. I waited for her to speak first. "Brian," she whispered, "I didn't mean for this to happen." "What happened?" I asked. "Tell me." She took a deep breath and started explaining. She told me that things with Jason had been bad for a while. At first, it was exciting for her. being with someone new. But then things changed. He became controlling, accusing her of cheating and hiding things. Eventually, he became violent. She said he started hitting her during their arguments, and she didn't know how to get out. I asked her why she didn't tell anyone, and she said she was too ashamed. She thought no one would care because of what she had done to me and our family. She said she felt trapped. I didn't know how to respond. She was giving me details I hadn't expected, and I didn't know how to feel about them. I asked her about that night, and she explained that they had been arguing again. She told Jason she was leaving him, and he became enraged. She described how he had grabbed her and thrown her against the wall. In a panic, she grabbed a knife from the kitchen, intending to scare him, but when he kept coming at her, she stabbed him. She said she didn't mean to keep stabbing him, but once she started, she couldn't stop. I stood there, processing her words. She had killed him. I believed that she was scared and that it was self-defense, but it didn't change the fact that a man was dead and she had done it. Sophia was crying again, asking for help, saying she didn't know what to do. I didn't know what to tell her. I wasn't sure if I could help her at all. I told her I was sorry, but I couldn't be the one to fix this. I turned and left the room, feeling no clearer than when I had arrived. I had seen her at her lowest point, but it didn't change anything between us. Sophia was no longer my responsibility. Over the next few days, more details came to light. The police investigation confirmed that there had been a history of domestic violence between Sophia and Jason. Neighbors had reported hearing loud arguments for weeks leading up to the incident. Sophia had bruises on her arms and ribs when they arrested her, supporting her story that she had been abused. Still, she was facing manslaughter charges. The case would take months to go through the courts, but it was clear that Sophia's life had taken a sharp downward spiral. During this time, I kept my distance. I had to focus on the kids and my relationship with Hannah. I told Ava and Ethan about what happened with their mother, though I kept the details vague. Mia was still too young to understand fully, so I didn't explain much to her. As the weeks passed, I learned that Sophia had pleaded guilty to voluntary manslaughter. Her defense had been self-defense, but she admitted to overreacting in the heat of the moment. She received a reduced sentence, but she was going to prison for a significant amount of time. I didn't attend the trial. It wasn't my place to be there. Life continued on after that. Hannah and I grew even closer, and I relied on her a lot during this period. She was supportive, understanding, and never pushed me to talk about Sophia more than I wanted to. The kids seemed to adjust well, though Ava had the hardest time accepting what her mother had done. I encouraged her to continue her therapy, and in time, she seemed to come to terms with it. About a year later, I received a letter from Sophia. It was short, just a few paragraphs. She apologized again for everything that had happened, not just with Jason, but for the way she had destroyed our marriage. She didn't make excuses for herself anymore. She said she had a lot of time to think in prison, and she realized how much damage she had done. She asked me to forgive her, but she said she understood if I couldn't. I didn't reply to the letter. I wasn't angry anymore, but I also didn't see the point. Sophia had been a part of my life for a long time, but that part was over. I had moved on, and I didn't want to dwell on the past any longer. Hannah and I got married about 6 months after that. It was a small ceremony, just family and close friends. The kids were there, of course. Ava and Mia were bridesmaids, and Ethan was my best man. It was a simple wedding, but it felt right. I had found happiness again, and this time, I knew it was with someone I could trust. Looking back, I realized how far I had come from the day I found out about Sophia's betrayal. There had been so many moments of anger, confusion, and sadness, but in the end, I had come out the other side. Life had moved on, and I had built something new, something better than what I had before. Sophia's life was her own now. I didn't need to carry the weight of her choices anymore. I had my family, my kids, and Hannah. That was all that mattered. Years went by, and Sophia faded from our lives. The kids rarely mentioned her, and I didn't bring her up. She had been released from prison eventually, but by then, her connection to us was weak. She had missed too many years, and there was no going back to fix it. I heard through mutual acquaintances that she had moved away, trying to start over somewhere else. As for me, I focused on the life I had built. Hannah and I grew stronger, and the kids flourished. Ava went off to college, followed by Ethan a few years later. Mia was still at home, but I could see she would soon be following in their footsteps. There were moments when I thought about Sophia and everything that had happened, but those thoughts were fleeting. They didn't hold the same weight they used to. I had learned to let go. In the end, the past was just that, the past. It couldn't be changed, and it didn't define my future. I had found peace in knowing that I had done the best I could for myself and my children. Life had its challenges, but I had faced them, and I had come through stronger. And that was enough. If you like the story, don't hesitate to subscribe and listen to new stories every day. Write in the comments what you like the most.